before we get started, please do make sure that your mics are muted and that if you turn your video off, then you can, it'll optimize the viewing for everybody else. You can also hide the non-video participants, and on the screen here it shows you how to do that. And that way you will have Richard as he presents at the top of your screen, and you'll be able to see the video recordings. So I will also encourage you to add any questions to the chat session. But in the meanwhile, we'll get started with Dr. Richard Booth, and then we are hoping that we'll be able to do his recorded presentation, and then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for questions. So Dr. Richard Booth is one of the co-chairs of the steering committee for this symposium, and he provided leadership for the report that came out of the symposium and is the focus of the symposium. He is an associate professor at the Arthur Labatt Family School of Nursing at Western University and a clinician researcher with an active research program exploring health informatics, human technical relationships, and psychiatric mental health nursing. Dr. Booth also recently completed a fellowship with the Provincial Institute for Clinical Evaluative Sciences, exploring the use of social media technology and its related impact on clinical and health systems utilization. So we will go ahead now with Dr. Booth. Please do enter your questions in the chat, and also take a minute to share what this presentation and the moment on social media using hashtag nursing and AI, all one word, and we'll participate in the discussion afterwards. I am going to turn my video off and Richard will go ahead. Go ahead, Richard.
Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Educating for Nurses for the Emerging Future series. I'm Richard Booth, and I will be leading us through the next 40 minutes of discussion around nursing education implications regarding the future of health technology and AI. So before we get going, I just was wondering if everyone could take a step back and potentially fire up their web browser, go to menti.com and enter the code number 726648. I'm certain that we'll probably end up putting in the chat the pin code here in the Menti. This is a pre-test that has 2 or 3 questions that I'm asking everyone to conduct. And what we'll do is we'll revisit it at the end to see if our ideas have changed from the content that I'm about to present, or if they haven't changed. Regardless, it'll be an interesting activity to do. So please, menti.com, and use the code there, and we'll have that in the chat box in case you're not able to grab it from the screen right now. So as part of the symposium, I have been delegated with providing information around nursing education. And some of the key points that came from the document that I'm certain everyone had a chance to read leading to this were these 2 points here: to develop a strategic plan to build capacity for basic informatics and digital literacy content, to assist the future nursing workforce, and also to conduct some sort of thorough review around nursing curricula to ensure there's some sort of congruency with the nursing role as it is going to probably evolve with the demands and the emerging nature of artificially intelligent health technologies. So as part of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the first point specifically, but in passing. I'm going to focus on the second point a little bit more targetedly, because I think the second part is something that I can speak to with examples, both from my own personal experience and other areas that I've been able to draw from. So with that, I've always liked to go around these kind of presentations in a somewhat roundabout way, because I found that if I jump just straight into things that you could do and education opportunities that you could potentially think about for your nurses or your professional practice angle, that it doesn't do justice to the actual topic. And I'm no different in this presentation. So I'm going to take a step back before I take a step forward. This is Dr. Joy Richards from 2001, when she wrote in Nursing Economics, an article called Nursing in a Digital Age. Now, I really resonated with this article way back when, during my early years of my undergraduate degree. When I found it, it was essentially life-changing in some respects in terms of how I saw the nursing profession potentially moving into the digital future. And you got to keep in mind, in 2000, 2001, the internet had only been really around for about 5 or 6 years in a usable fashion for everyday purposes. She wrote back then, as a society, we barely comprehend the true effects of our increasing involvement with computers. Technology does not function in a vacuum, but within our social matrix, interacting with individuals in an organization. That one-liner I want to infuse in the rest of this presentation. So let's take a step back. In the 50s, people were speaking about telemedicine, telehealth, and thinking about what the future could look like, that you could have a clinician through a robot that could talk to you, that could touch you. And then you move into the 80s, you have things like the internet here. This is actually CompuServe, one of the first ISPs, speaking about what the internet could look like in the future. And it seems really quaint when you look at the description. Someday in the comfort of your home, you can answer emails, electronically bank, and play bridge with people across the world. It just sounds so archaic now, considering that my iPhone that's sitting beside me, keeping time, can do all that and more. When we move forward into the current day realities, when you walk around, say, an acute care organization, you see shiny objects of healing. You see computers on wheels, you see radiology, you see electronic records, you see all sorts of shiny things that are digitally technology enabled that we didn't have 15, 20, 30 years ago. So what has this done to nursing education? Where has nursing education gone in this growth and development that we've seen around digital technology? Well, we have changed, but a lot of what we do in education has not changed too much, to be honest. A lot of it has stayed the same. We have a lot of core tenets, a lot of core ideals in nursing education that we hold on to. And those are really good. They help us have a grounding to our background and our lineage. And we've also started down the pathway in the profession, especially within Canada and more specifically Ontario with some of the RNEO activities, to really look at digital technology and what it might mean for the next generation of nursing students. So we have lots of information that has been upgrown. We have informatics competencies as of 2012 in COSN, and we have lots of other knowledge products that have been developed to really assist nurses and nursing educators to figure out where we need to go in the future. And the nursing role, too, hasn't been static. It's been evolving. This is just some slices of the media for the last 3 or 4 years. We've had some amazing growth within the profession in terms of role and scope, and we've had other things that have come along, predominantly right now, COVID, that have really reshaped and are going to continue to reshape things that we thought were static in the profession and moving forward, for right or for wrong. And these are things that we need to think about as we move into the future. So what I really have come to realize as my time as an educator is that we sometimes live within a bubble. And our bubble in nursing education, and I'm speaking more specifically from the university and college education perspective, although I don't want to ever diminish the professional practice angles within clinical environments and that type of nursing education. But far too often, sometimes we focus on the things that are around us and that are our locus of control. And we forget that there's a world that's happening around us. And this is where I want to start popping this bubble a bit. I want to go above and beyond what we see as our educational requirements or our competencies for digital health in our current state. Because our current state essentially was developed 5-10 years ago. We need to think about the future state and where we need to be in 2030 and 2040. So our nursing students of today are active professionals then. This is 10 million Facebook friends. You can see the connection between 10 million people on the Facebook network essentially lights up the world. Any place where there are people logging onto Facebook, and with roughly 1.8 billion active registered users per week that log into Facebook, you have a good percentage of the population who logs on to this globally per day. There is nowhere now that you can't connect to via someone on Facebook, and Facebook being arguably an old social media platform. I read some of the stats that Facebook analyzed about themselves, and you are roughly 3.5 degrees of separation away from any active registered user on the Facebook network. Never before have we lived in a world where 3.5 degrees of separation separates you from someone you don't know. It's an amazing exponential sort of reality that we live within. And if you take just some cross sections of more media releases in the last few years, you start to see this sort of thing. And this is what I'm speaking about, the bubble. Sometimes we forget that these things are happening outside of our workplace, outside of our domain, outside of our education. And in some respects, they may not have immediate implications on your day-to-day, but they have some significant long-term things that we need to think about. So we start seeing things about robotics and artificial intelligence. We start seeing how Facebook and Cambridge Analytica lost $70 billion in a week and a half, but pretty much walked it off like a leg cramp. We start to see other topics like killer robots ban on this? Like, where did that come from? Like, where did things about autonomous machines start to come up? And things about drones delivering packages to airports, and Black Mirror, a Netflix episode, sadly becoming aspects of reality in certain countries. We start going further down the rabbit hole, and you start to see other topics that you have just kind of normalized into the everyday. You don't see anymore because they happen so subtly, but so frequently that we're just fire hosed with media every day around news and events that we don't see these sorts of things occurring. Amazon, as of recently, about a year and a half ago, says there's 100 million Alexa devices that have been sold. So right now, if you own some modern day technology that has anything parts from Amazon, you likely have an Alexa in your house. I counted up the number of Alexas I have in my house unintentionally, and it's actually at least 2 of them. And I didn't try to buy an Alexa, but they're embedded into a lot of Amazon products. We have things like the 4th industrial revolution, where the AI and AI kind of technologies and internet things are coming, and they already exist. And we'll talk about that, and how everything that you could potentially link together with technology has already arrived. If you go to any store like a Best Buy, about a quarter of the store now is smart home automation and technology, where you can plug your coffee maker into your Alexa, into your Nest, into your house, into your robot vacuum cleaner, into your security system. And now we live in this ecosystem of technology. Once again, go back to your nursing education bubble. We see this stuff from our social lives, but we don't think about it from an education perspective. This is an old Reddit post from 2015, where it shows replacement of humans by machines, cash registers. This is something that I realized when I saw this image, that this is something that we need to start thinking about from a nursing and nursing education perspective. If things like this can have happened in other industries, where does this leave the profession moving into the future? And if, to stress the point home even further, you start to see these sorts of articles come up. And Saudi Arabia made Sophia a citizen. Sophia is a robot. She's not a human. They gave her citizenship. She needs a visa to go to different countries because she has been given a citizenship. So a non-human thing being granted a human level trait. Like, I can't even make this kind of stuff up. You know, Kate Darling, if you want to look at a really interesting TED video, go look at the emotional connection to robots video that she put up there. We now live in a really weird world where we know all this stuff happens, because you might see it in passing, but you kind of shrug your shoulders and go, that's a good thing I'm doing what I'm doing, because none of this is important. Well, I'm here to suggest that a lot of this is important, but we just haven't given it our lens, because sometimes we live within our bubble where we don't see outside of our bubble because it's just dark and distant out there, but it's actually a lot more closer than we think. McMaster University in 2014 created a hitchbot. This robot was just designed to say, hey, I'm a robot. Can you put me in your car and drive me somewhere? And it hitchhiked its way across Canada. Now, it was not successful trying to hitchhike across the United States, but we're starting to find that these sorts of research studies and these sorts of prototypical human robotic interaction studies are starting to show some really interesting and sometimes awkward findings about humans, and then our relationship with non-human things like robots. And as of most recently, and I've actually cut down on the slides and discussion of this a fair amount, we have the discussion of data, which I think is probably the most relevant as I get into the implications moving down the way, because it is the most material in our face, but yet the most invisible. Some of my second-year undergrad students, we talk about data, and we start off with a class that I'll speak to in a little bit about how social media and professionalism is very important. Like, don't put up pictures, don't say things you wouldn't say normally, don't break personal health information. And those topics are very, very grabbable. You know, don't do things that are going to come back and get you online later in a legal or a principles or a professionalism sort of fashion. The students can get that. But then what I challenge them, the fact that everything they've ever clicked on the internet has likely been tracked. Anything they've ever looked at has been aggregated together by algorithms and bots. And then we start seeing articles like this, like Clearview is an AI company that scrapes the internet for facial recognition, then uses machine learning to link them all together. And you can see this news reporter here was able to get a hold of their Clearview AI record and found all these images that she had posted to the internet, or didn't even know she'd posted to the internet, that this company was able to scrape without her permission. Data and the representation of you and your patients in the form of data is the next wave that's coming, which I'll speak to as education implications as we move forward. Probably more material than, robotics and automation in our lives at this point, but way more difficult to grasp because it's invisible. Because this is the world in 2020 that we all live within. Bottom left, you have an eccentric billionaire who's digging a tunnel under a city to get to his rocket ship factory faster, who also flung his car into space because he could. That happened. We have every color and shape of social media that you can map yourself, you can aggregate yourself, you can link yourself. We have drones. I had a drone fly by my office a year ago. I don't know who was flying that drone, but someone was flying a drone past my office. We have Internet of Things. We have electronic digital cash. We have VR. We have quantified self. We now live in a world where everything has become augmented by digital health technology. Everything has become augmented by digital Internet things. And we now no longer can represent ourselves absent from it. So what does this mean for our future? I've given everyone right now a big background on different technologies. And honestly, that was the condensed list. There's much more I could have gone into of things that are current state, that are sometimes a little bit existentially terrifying, if you ask me, when I'm speaking about data and the representation of you in the form of data, or robotics or artificial intelligence. How does this all play back to our nursing education bubble, which kind of feels nice and safe and wholesome? I advocate, as I've advocated in other presentations before, that the only way we can move forward as a collective profession and as educators is if we reconceptualize our relationship with emerging technology. If we reconceptualize it, then we can engage in discourse. And unless we engage in discourse, we will not be able to evolve what is our current ideals of modern day nursing role in education. This is how we break free of the bubble. We need to take a step back and look at our profession and look at our educational strategies in light of context outside of our bubble. Societal things that we're all being subject to, but sometimes we're not consciously aware of. So this is not my second year class, but honestly, pre-COVID, this could have been my second year class. I teach in a large lecture hall. Actually, it's kind of funny when you think about lecture halls. This image is very not doable in any Canadian city at this point. But pre-COVID, this is what my class would look like. I sit in front of a bunch of 19-year-old students on a weekly basis who all have MacBooks, an iPhone or an Android in their pocket, really get angry when the Wi-Fi goes down, have never used a photocopier, and I've asked that each year since 2015. I get 1 or 2 hands out of 150 who have ever used a photocopier, and have zero conceptualization of paper. But yet, when I give them some of the rhetorical questions I've asked you thus far, or I've mentioned thus far in terms of some of the technologies that exist, they have concerns regarding technology that is encroaching on various things that they felt dear, especially within elements of the profession of nursing. Now, keep on, this is a generation who has never known a world without the internet, but yet they still get concerned when presented with various artificially intelligent health technologies and other things and their potential that they might show in the future. So I get them to do this thought experiment. All these responses were generated by my students about 1.5 years ago. And they generate these responses and then they upvote them or downvote them. So green means I like. So you can see there's like 2 or 24 people who have upvoted that. Yellow is meh or kind of neutral. And red is I dislike, downvote. So you can see the first one, that future nurses should be educated on programming robots and various health technologies. Most people are 10. And then the second one down, which I thought was interesting, our nursing curriculum needs to change and to incorporate these technologies. That is clearly happening. 24, yes, no one down. Move down to the next arrow here. Our future role could involve a robotic partnership. Yeah, probably. Robots may have to be programmed with emotions, empathetic responses. No, 27, no. Someday we may be advocating for robots and technology. 22 up. What I really enjoy about this slide, and this was all done in one session, is the binary nature of the students. We need this, but don't tell me about it. It's coming, but I don't want to hear about it because it's going to change something I like. The back and forth. And honestly, if I were to ask this for a lot of nurses, not just students, I think I would get similar patterns, because in our bubble, in our way of knowing the world, we've become very comfortable with certain processes. And whether it's we haven't reconceptualized our relationship or some other factors within us are holding us back from really exploring the future, I'm not quite certain. But this shows to me some sort of existential distress. on behalf of the students, where they know something is coming, but they're reluctant to move forward to it because it challenges something deep down inside that they're not quite sure about. And remember how I said that these were essentially Gen Z students who have never known a world without the internet? I just asked this question last week to them after going through some informatics things around access to health information. So this is a pretty basic question in my estimation in 2020. Should patients and consumers be given access to their electronic health information? Like, should you have access to your electronic health records? Out of the 79 students we asked, we still have 10% of them who say no. Once again, these are 19-year-old students who've never known a world without the internet, who still think that we shouldn't give people access to their own health information. Generally, when I ask this question, I get anywhere from 10 to 15% say no. And the responses are that patients will do something, quote unquote, stupid with their health information. It's just an interesting trait that I find that continues to exist. I'm not sure what perpetuates it, but we have this very paternalism kind of angle that comes in some students. Versus this question, which I think is really interesting, asked at the same time, should patients and consumers be allowed to edit or add content? You have roughly 10% who say yes, and the majority say no. So this 10, 11% versus this 10, 11% are very far apart in terms of their ontological approach to how they see patient care, which I think is really telling, considering that we have Gen Z students who've never known the world of the internet who answered these questions, that we are not uniformed in the way we see the future. And if we're not uniformed in the way we even see access to health information or potentially editing it, we're going to have some problems as educators move in the future to really embrace some of these things that we're probably going to have to embrace sooner rather than later. So has this topic started to influence within nursing education in a material and knowledge sort of way? I would say yes. So these are raw CINAHL results that I took over the last little while just to take a look at the trajectory that we're seeing here. And I haven't even bothered updating it to current data, so I ended in April 2019. But you can see from the word social media, you had roughly 7,000 up to March of 2018 from the iteration of CINAHL. And remember, social media didn't really exist, until about 2007, 2008 as a word. You had that number double in a year. Look at some other terms here. Artificial intelligence has essentially doubled in the amount of CINAHL search terms. Now, I appreciate this is a sledgehammer approach here, but just as a macro way to see the evolution of a topic that virtually did not exist, that doubled in 1 year. And I bet this number is twice that now in 2020. Internet of Things, pretty significant. Uber, which I think is interesting. All the findings pre-2018 weren't really speaking of the model of the economy that we now know as Uber. It was pretty much search terms using Uber as a German word for big, actually. So we now have the model of the economy that didn't exist before, which is now actually being challenged in many ways from an equity perspective. Other topics like robots and nursing, machine learning, which, conservatively doubled in a year. We have topics that weren't a topic that are becoming a topic in education and becoming a topic in nursing research. So I've asked this question to my undergrads before. And this was, I think, the most telling of responses that I've received. And this one was done about a year ago also. In my future self, what will it be? And these are responses from undergrad students. The ones that really make me happy is the ones that I see like this. Because these students get it. They get it, but they're still terrified of the things that they see coming. And sometimes they're empowered, but a lot of times there's a lot of fear that goes with it. And I'm not sure if the fear is something that we need to, work out or work with. I'm thinking sometimes the work with. But that nurses will not be replaced anytime soon is a very nice trait that I see always come forth. And the students are very, very adept and articulate in describing why the humans and nurses cannot go away, even in light of some of these pretty amazing health technologies that are driven by AI. So that is a core tenet that I think we have within my small cross-section of undergrads, but I would suggest it's probably similar across Canada if we were to ask the same questions to other undergraduate nursing students around the country. But we're not seeing the word replace anymore kind of as the mindset. Students are even starting to appreciate that. It's not that we're going to be, robots are going to rise up and take our roles, but we're going to be changed by the technologies that are coming, and we need to use them to our benefit. So I like to kind of start on my segue backwards to nursing education specifically by focusing on this taxonomy put together by KPMG a few years ago. The URL is in the bottom left. I implore you to have a look at the white paper where it comes from, because it's been the most articulate white paper I've been able to find to describe where the world is going, and not specifically so much healthcare, but the world. And you got to keep in mind, sometimes within our bubble, we think within nursing education that it's just about us. Well, we're just a part of the larger ecosystem, especially when it comes to the digital world. So in nursing education, we have, and I appreciate the words are not as, worded in nursing language per se, but from a human knowledge worker perspective and human skills and tasks, we really have that down a nutshell. We've written entire theoretical books on that. We have published iterations of articles and knowledge and workshops and whatever have you on our relationship with people. That is one of the core tenets of nursing. And I think nursing education continues to do that in a very functional way, even in light of COVID. We're working around those sorts of things, and we're trying to retain the human connection. But as you can see on this taxonomy, this is just one of the four that we need to think about moving into the future. We have on the top here, robotic process optimization, and the bottom right, cognitive technology. So this is essentially your AI and your machine learning, all those technologies. And your robotic process optimization, we've talked about that in terms of robots and things like that. They're all going to start to converge into this digital labor. And I think in some weird and sort of perverse way, we're seeing COVID amplify this and catalyze it. We're seeing processes, and I speak from an education perspective, which I'm hopeful other education will resonate. Things that were just no-go, can't do that in education, essentially become, well, I guess we have to, and now become standard of practice in the last 6 months. And it's changing what I know university education to be. Now, is that right or for wrong? I'm not going to go there. That's for you to decide. But we are now entering a place where things that used to be in the background or primordial or prototypical are now starting to infuse with things like human labor to create new types of ways of doing things. And as nurses and as nursing education, we need to be receptive to that and work with it, because our students are already there. They appreciate, even though they're somewhat scared of it, that they need to work with the things that are coming, not against them, as a complementary and an augmented way, as opposed to a replacement mindset, which thankfully has started to die out. Another KPMG article that I usually go to when I'm looking for future ideas, and hopefully this can give some insights to people who are trying to plan curricula and things like that, the URLs in the bottom left, is the future of healthcare. Now, I appreciate KPMG is a very large consulting firm, so they probably have some vested interest here and there, but I still think it gives a good vision towards things that we now know are possible. And in light of the facilitating nature of COVID in terms of digitizing things that potentially weren't thought to be able to be digitized before, a good mental heuristic to kind of look at. So this is one slide on the left there, healthcare on demand and personalized health and connection, where we start to see different modalities of care and models of care start to emerge that are going to heavily leverage digital technologies, but also humans, and also potentially the nursing role, should we decide to invest ourselves into these. And that's once again, that's the choice of the profession. That's the choice of educators to talk about these sorts of upcoming models of care to students. So students appreciate that in 20 years' time, the role in nursing that they'll be undertaking may not have a name today because it essentially doesn't exist. And that in the next 20 years, they will create that role that fits within maybe precision healthcare. A nursing role within precision healthcare, where we're using genetic ideals and genetic approaches to create treatments for individuals and treat and care plans. Like, words that don't really exist today in our nursing vernacular could be something that we exist within 20 years. The one that I really liked, and I spend most of my research time focusing on from both an education and also research angle, is the hybrid workforce. Now, this is the one that engenders the most kind of visceral responses from nurses. And I've spoken with lots of different demographics of nurses, lots of different areas of nursing, whether it be, leadership, union, academia, research, education. And whenever you start speaking about robots and automation, usually people's shoulders go up in the profession, and for rightfully so. But these are things that we still need to actually think about. We need to break free of our bubble and look at them and reconceptualize our relationship with them. Because if you're listening to this presentation today, you are likely an end product of some sort of automated process whether the technology you're using and or a lot of the internet things that kind of happened for you to actually listen to this presentation. So while it may feel distant, we have a lot of things in our relationship with technology that we sometimes don't think about. We need to start to evolve more within the nursing role. Let you have a look at some of these other ones, but you can see how some of these aspects are starting to happen today. The fact that, virtual reality and augmented reality in education, that's become not commonplace, but evolving. And I think you'll see more of that in light of COVID implications. So have a look at the KPMG white document here, because I think it gives some good insight to where the future is going. With all that, that is the background to now be able to fully describe why some of the things that I see are important to do in the future in terms of nursing education need to be done. So I can only really speak for myself at this point. I've tried to pull from other ideas, but this is one of these topics where it happens so quickly. By the time that some article is published on something else has already started to occur. So there are publications on some of these aspects, and there are things you can look at. But really at this point, I think most educators listening to this already have enough in their back pocket to start down the pathway. And that's, I think, the thing that people sometimes fail to realize is you already do enough as a nursing educator. You just need to reconceptualize what you can do into the future. I think that's where I'm going to suggest the advocacy part comes in. At Western University, we kind of recognized that this trajectory of digital health technology was where the world was going, and that we needed a core class within our undergraduate program. So all second-year students at the School of Nursing, off the bat, Family School of Nursing at Western, take a health informatics within nursing course as part of their second-year program. And this is, you can see, our cross-section of the classes. And now the words don't speak to exactly what we do, but you can get the ebb and flow. Where we're going with it. We're speaking about technology-enabled models of care. We're talking about evidence-informed practice. All the things that we actually do, but with a bit more of a technology bent on it. So we're not staying in whatever, when this course was created in 2013, 2014, the model of care there. We use that as a jumping point to what the future might hold in terms of models of care. So our students at least have some idea that things are changing. So as the first topic of that class, we talk about social media, and I've already mentioned this previous in the presentation. And the Karen Strom situation just actually had some resolve, just finally resolved actually a couple of weeks ago. But we talk about social media because it is in everyone's face. It is in every nursing student's face. So they can grasp it, they can understand it. And you can see from when we start talking about social media, all the policy, all the ethics, all the professionalism that go for it. But then you start to be able to segue that social media is just data points. It's data points on lots of things. And once you realize that data points can be aggregated, collected, and modified by algorithms, you start getting into misinformation and disinformation. Like Parsia's TEDx video is one of the turning points we use to turn from social media explicitly to personalization on the internet. And you start to be able to talk about what artificial intelligence and algorithms can do to your search terms and can do to what you find on Google. And then you start going down the pathway that, algorithms are the things that potentially operate non-human things like robots. And you start to see that automation is everywhere. And if you pushed buy on Amazon the last couple of years, the likelihood that a robot helped that package get to your house is pretty much 100%. It starts to really ground things. And then you start to go, what would be my role if I had a cobot in a nursing situation? What could I do with that cobot? And then you start to go down the path where if robots and cobots, robots that work with people are a potential, what other kind of digital models of care exist? For right or for wrong? We're talking about Maple, a for-profit company that exists. Like, where does that fit in future of healthcare? Should it exist? These are all implications that we can start to get into. Parenting and Peel is a great Facebook page where they talk about healthcare-related things on Facebook. A job and a role that I could not have foreseen that existed 10 years ago. The fact that social media is being used as a healthcare intervention. More closely to other people, if you don't have a requisite course, you can think about your simulation. Pretty much every school has simulation of some sort. And we have decided that, our simulation, while the high fidelity is great, what kind of value add can we build on it so we can start to build towards the 2030, 2040 healthcare system where we can start to virtualize things that may not have been virtualizable, say, 5 years ago. And electronic medication administration is a great place to start because it's local. But, you make your own electronic medication record, and we made one here. There's lots of opportunities that maybe you don't need the physical sim lab to really master something. Maybe you can take this back because everyone generally has a computer nowadays or access to one. So we took our medication administration and we made a video game out of it. Now, I won't lie, the video game doesn't look real great, but my goodness, the R&D that went into creating the algorithms behind this to ensure that medication administration practice was up to par, things that were actually clinically possible, because every one of these boxes essentially is a data point and has to work from a clinically correct perspective. So to figure out the taxonomy and the rights of medication in electronic medication land, along with the evolution of the college in terms of the principles-based medication approach, was really complex. But that is the value of this game. We essentially were able to create a training mechanism where students could give out as many medications as they wanted and create as many errors as they needed to without harming a patient. It was super complex, but you can see the data points behind that start to give you ideas to how to use data in the future for other nursing and nursing education related things. In so much as we decided that because we got good at that game, we're going to make a dementia home care simulator. So we're going to make another video game, because getting into home care is really, really hard. Interacting with clients with dementia is equally hard because you just can't walk in. We're limited for clinical placements. So while this may not be an absolute replacement for any clinical experience, we can now have students have a bit of experience before they go into certain places or complement existing experience. It's definitely not a replacement. But in light of current day realities with COVID, in some respects, this game actually became heaven sent. So what this started enabling us to do is we had to create the taxonomy. We had to create the scenario through data and different data points that are iterative, and the cascading of iterative things. That started to get me ideas of, if I can create an algorithm for a really complex scenario that holds true, at least from a clinical perspective, maybe we can do other stuff, which I'll get to in a second. So we made the video game here. We're actually trialing it next week for interprofessional education. Because of COVID, we usually do the interprofessional things like as a big group, but this game worked out perfectly in that we have a game that we can have audiologists, OT, PT, nursing, and another group I can't remember off the top of my head right now. We're going to come together, they're going to play the game, and they're going to speak about interprofessional client care and making care plans around a scenario that is essentially like a standardized patient, but done as a video game. And you can see that you can walk up to the person's house. This is Bill and Audrey in there. You can interact with them. We didn't have enough money for voice actors, but that will be coming soon, hopefully, when we take this game to 2.0, 2.3. And there's, depending on what you pick, there's an emotional engine built within this, so the people will react differently. You'll get different responses depending on how therapeutic you are. So the core tenet of this game is therapeutic client relationships. If you are aggressive with the clients, they'll be aggressive with you and they'll shut down and kick you out of their house. So we had a great time making this game, but it was super complex. As you can see, this is one decision matrix of one screen of a 4-episode game that is about 45 minutes of playtime. A terrifying amount of complexity. But when you start seeing this, you realize this is an algorithm. And if you can create algorithms like this for complex decisions, like therapeutics and client relationships, why can't we do things like start thinking about what cobots and other kind of automated things that are nursing assistants that could help us? And companies are already doing it. This is Moxie. Some of my colleagues in Texas are actually evaluating Moxie, the friendly robot who wants to help nurses. And this robot essentially stocks shelves. But every picture I saw of Moxie, the nurses have adorned Moxie with like a name tag and a hat, and just they've done anthropomorphic things to this robot, even though it's not human. So it really makes me think that we need to start going down this pathway in education, because this is already starting to happen. If I can make a video game with complex algorithms for various things, there's nothing stopping us from programming robots like this to do things that support and amplify the nursing role. You hear how I said support and amplify, I didn't say replace, because these things aren't going to replace us anytime soon. But we need to start thinking about how we can work with these things to amplify and evolve the nursing role. So I was able to land a bunch of robots. This company went out of business. Before they did, they sent me a few of them, and we drive them around at Western, and I could reprogram them. I just need a little more time in my life to get to that. But we created a bedroom, and we started doing simulations from an older adult perspective in terms of someone living with intelligent assisted devices in amongst them. And we were able to put nursing students through here and enable them to experience having a robot drive up and hand them a toilet paper roll. And that might seem kind of like just like, okay, whatever. But it's really weird when you have that happen the first time. You're like, I need something, and a robot brings it to you. Like that's a really salient experience to go through. And until you've gone through something like that, where a non-human thing sort of helps you out, it's really hard to thought experiment about it. So we have a simulation lab where we can try those sorts of things. So it's all primordial. It's all very prototypical rather, but it's something that we need to start thinking about and evolving current things that we all have, which are simulation labs, to things that we can potentially replicate or simulate moving into the future. So we were very lucky at Western. We received a huge financial sum from some philanthropy, and we are able to now scale our virtual reality, which we've been starting, to significant levels. So we're building a VR lab at the school to take some of these technologies and off-the-shelf technologies to really scale for nursing education. And virtual reality has become a really important topic for clinical education as of late, because there's things you can do, whether it be haptic simulation or visualizing and seeing something in really high fidelity. That hasn't been able, and there's a few other schools in Canada that have been able to do this. So we're going to try a bit of this. We're going to take some of the core assets we have already, like controlling a robot or playing video games, and build them in the VR, and probably try out some holographic individuals. So we'll have some standardized patients where we can replicate, we can scale, and then potentially in the future, maybe with some machine learning, actually interact with in a meaningful way. So you can interact with something that's not human, but that responds in a human-like fashion. That's probably about 5-6 years away at this point, but right now we're going to start somewhere. So serious simulation, serious gaming is something that currently exists, but how can we take our simulation labs using the assets and the core things that we have there already and amplify them, whether through augmented reality, virtual reality, or things like robots? We now live in a really cool place in the world where things that used to be so far removed due to cost and cost prohibitive natures are now accessible, like VR and AR, that we need to start thinking about how we can use them to educate students to the next coming wave of whatever the healthcare system is going to look like. So in the final minutes that I have here, I wanted to speak about the one thing that, from my perspective at least, we haven't been able to really check the boxes off in terms of the report that everyone read coming to the symposium. And it's graduate education. We're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of taking advanced level practice nurses and scaling them through graduate education to really understand how AI and AI related technologies are going to impact healthcare systems. So everything I've talked about up to this point is very transactional, almost kind of undergrad level. But as graduate education goes to advance from a professional practice and leadership perspective, we need to really ensure that people doing graduate degrees in nursing education and nursing in general have an idea of the implications of a lot of this technology, and be able to do things like predictive modeling, machine learning. Starting to get into a bit of that in nursing. We have some at Western, but it's really hard slog because it takes a bunch of different disciplines and puts them together. Privacy issues, that's huge. I don't see those words come up at all beyond personal health information in a 1.0 sort of fashion. A little bit more 2.0 in terms of digital, but we're talking about like mass privacy implications through algorithms. And then the range of ethical and privacy things, like the automation of inequities. If we're creating machine learning and algorithms to do things, they're going to automate things that are inequitable. And as nurses and as stewards of social justice, we need to really start thinking about that. That starts to get into a graduate level education and potentially new roles for nurses that we didn't actually think kind of existed in technology. But we need to take what we know as nurses and start scaling towards that. So with that 40-minute discussion on various education angles with a little bit of background, if you could now go to menti.com and use the code 1941581, you can answer those 2 questions again, and we'll see if any of those numbers change. And when we stop the recording here, we'll be able to take a look at the results of that.
Thank you, Richard. That was excellent, as always. Excellent as always. You have a very wonderful, dynamic way of delivering kind of terrifying news, but still giving us hope. So thank you for that. I have a general idea of the questions and sort of grouping them together in some sort of general overhead questions. You've been doing a good job of answering questions in the chat as we've been going. Do you want to go to Menti first and then do questions, or do questions first? What would be your preference?
How about we'll just do the Menti thing here first, and then we can go to the questions. Honestly, though, I probably don't need to put up the screenshots because everyone was the top right of the quadrant. So everyone pretty much marked 10 out of 10. I'm not even going to bother putting up the screen for both pre and post. I just checked the post, and there's really no change. Everyone has already pretty much aligns the fact that this is an important topic, both from a basic health informatics perspective, but also a little bit of movement in the AI, but that went up pretty much to 10 out of 10 for everyone by the end of it. So yes, preaching to the converted, as Tammy says, is kind of, I guess, the best way to put it. So with that, though, I'll take a step back and back to you there, Glenda.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. So what I would say is that we're hearing a lot of questions from probably mostly educators around what some of these advancing technologies mean for education in terms of blended learning, online learning, virtual sim, gaming, how that affects us in terms of teaching students and what we need to work on to actually start the process, if not continue the process with moving students forward. So I'm interested to hear in summary what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you. It's interesting, and thank you everyone for the comments. I tried to respond to as many as I could. I think the important thing is for you, everyone who's an educator, you're going to see about 95 people here, to think about what you have already in stock as an asset, as a teaching and learning modality, and to build on it from there. There's no sense going, oh, I wish I had that game, because honestly, the game's not going to do anything for you if you haven't kind of built it in or evolved it to be comfortable with it. So think of the things that you have in terms of the knowledge products and the different educational modalities, whether it be simulation, some really interesting clinical placements, and think about how the digital technology top can be infused into it. So what I like to think about is not so much the game, it's the potential of the game. And the game itself, like I said, a couple of them I showed you, are kind of cool. They took a lot of time and a bunch of finances to make, but I'm already thinking the second wave. The game itself is nice, but the clicks that people make show me decision pathway. And that's where I'm always thinking. So you're always kind of future planning something that comes after something else. So if you want to even look at your clinical simulation right now, you can really do some very basic quality improvement work to see people's decision making around, say, a piece of technology. And then that can help you build the next wave. So it becomes a really iterative thing. Because I honestly, I did not go from zero to video games overnight. It was watching people hand out medications that enabled us to realize that students really didn't understand what the barcode scanner did for their medications, which then led us to decide that, okay, we need a video game, maybe we potentially help that. And then one step further, the data being spit out of that video game is hugely valuable. And especially as we talk about the topic of AI health technologies, data is essentially the new oil. So if I can figure out through data points why people click on certain things, I can potentially create protective mechanisms for nurses. And you can see how the cascading nature of that. It's really reconceptualizing your relationship around a tool like a piece of technology into the fact that it becomes a dynamic actor that you have a relationship with well above and beyond just merely using it for some instrument or some device to execute some sort of task. It's like your phone. I've asked in lots of different presentations, can someone give me their phone for the day? And usually one person says, okay, I'll do it. But most people are pretty passionate about their phone because it's essentially a connection to them. You start reconceptualizing things that you have in your locus and things in your education realm, how you can amplify with that relationship, then it gives you really lots of opportunities to build educational activities that can help you embed some of these conversations and topics moving in the future.
Absolutely. And I think that segues nicely into some of the concerns several people raised. And I think for many of us in smaller colleges and universities, those capabilities just aren't even feasible. So how can we look at sharing and providing opportunities to learn from one another? And I know part of this symposium is one of those ways, and RNAO is doing some really good work along those lines to make sure that we do not reinvent the wheel and we help one another in these spheres. The other topic that came up several times is the concern around the sort of that emotional piece, right, that the robots have. And yes, we can kind of see it, but not quite. And to as the one example, yes, absolutely, I'd love a robot to come in and help me with lifting my large patients and moving them and maybe delivering some supplies, that type of thing. But where does that cross over? What's the line where that crosses over into really kind of stepping into the zone of discomfort for all of us?
And that's honestly sometimes the conversations we need to have. So some of the kind of preliminary pilot work I do kind of looks at those topics. And I really love engaging nursing students with this because they see the world sometimes without a lot of history or bias in terms of how they see things. So it's a very polarized way, which is good and bad. But honestly, the world is our oyster at this point. If we don't do something, I think Doris said in the chat here, someone else, if we sit by the sidelines, someone else is going to do it for us. It is really up to us to steward what we want to see happen in the next 20 years or so, really related to the profession, things like automation and cognitive technologies. So we could honestly just sit by and we'll be fine. The nursing role will still probably look the same, but we will not have the stature that we should have if we get involved now. And we're already kind of late. We're kind of late to the game, honestly. We should have been doing this about 5, 6, 7 years ago. Because what this enables us to do is help evolve things that support tenets of the profession that we want to hold on to dear and hold on to true, but also amplify things that can amplify the nursing role in new and different ways that weren't inconceivable. The fact that Facebook is used by RNs on a daily basis to talk to people about pregnancy is something I couldn't have even conceived. But that is a nursing role in Toronto that is done on a daily basis. So really, it's reconceptualizing what we can do in light of some of the things and holding on to things that we want to hold on to because they're either human or they're so core to nursing that if we let go, we'd essentially be diluting the profession into the future. It's up to us to steward that, because if we don't, some for-profit company probably will.
Yeah. Very good point. We need to make sure our voices are heard and to really involve ourselves in these conversations. And you spoke a little to the inequities of automation and what that means, and somebody mentioned the social dilemma. So if you haven't watched the social dilemma on Netflix, please do. But yes, send your emails and other questions. You can send them to Doris. She's put her an email in there. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you, Richard. Really, really appreciate your presentation as always. Excellent. And I encourage everybody to attend the panel presentation. And the link to this is in the email confirmation that you received. And I hope you really enjoy the rest of the day. Excellent couple of presentations left. And thank you to RNAO for putting on a fantastic symposium for us today. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks everyone. See you back.
Thanks, Richard. Bye.